So if you say evolutionary intelligence, what's the key idea? The key idea is that these technologies can be compensatory, can compensate for the relatively well understood limitations of the human cognitive system and the built-in biases of the human cognitive system. What was beneficial for survival when we had clubs and maybe stones as resources for us in the grasslands and the jungles may not be the same that will serve us well in the modern environment. So if you think about Kahneman and Tversky's notion, they call it in a formal way prospect theory, about half a dozen, maybe a dozen known systematic biases in misrepresenting risk and future developments that probably were beneficial to survival in hunting and gathering days, and clearly not beneficial for our survival. Kahneman got the Nobel Prize from economics because they realized understanding human biases and representing risk and reward, systematic errors in understanding our environment is something that might benefit from correction. And I'm thinking these technologies can provide it. And I'm going to start by asking you if you've heard the one about how paper clips are going to kill us. Have you heard the AI? Well, we've got a couple of people about the paper clips. So our colleague, Nick Bostrom at Oxford University, developed a scenario, I think with good intent. And the idea is if you generated a command to a all-powerful, super smart AI system and said, make as many paper clips as possible, eventually that empowered agentic system would kill all human beings because it would intelligently figure out that the atoms that make up living human beings could be converted into paper clips. And since the only command that is running the system, so ultimately those paper clips will kill us. And it seems like such an exaggerated scenario. I'm sure that Professor Bostrom's intent is to say, let's still pay attention to this, the extreme, and there's been basically every other day in at least the New York Times, there will be the AI, Syria is going to kill us kind of op-ed, but it's been two particularly demonstrable ones, one by Noam Chomsky and another by Harari and colleagues, raising questions about the potential threats of AI. Since I'm talking about the future and the next generation of AI, I take note of this tradition. I respect that. I think we need to be very careful about the potential negative challenges of AI. I'll conclude with my particular view of that. But the rest of my presentation is going to say, let's for the next half hour adopt a view to say, let's think through what the positive effects could be of next generation AI and work toward that ideal and think kind of how would that actually work out if, and this is the central concept of my book, the concept of evolutionary intelligence is based on this kind of a metaphoric notion that, well, wheels made us more mobile, machines made us stronger, telecom allowed us to communicate across the earth, and AI may actually make us smarter in practical ways in day-to-day, and not just for elites, but for every individual who want to take advantage of it. If more or less the great majority of human beings have mobile phones, many of them smartphones, I think ultimately we can see that controllable AI will be in the hands of a very large portion of the population, and that could be a good thing. the concept of artificial intelligence was invented in the mid-1950s. And it isn't until 70 years later that we really start to see examples of the artificial intelligence that was imagined 70 years ago. And the question is, what was lacking in the technology and the environment that prevented a real artificial intelligence from being demonstrated for 70 years, despite a great deal of effort? And I think there are three impediments we can identify. And thinking about them, I think is helpful for understanding the fourth, which is the focus of my research. The first was we didn't have sufficient computing power. Turns out that large language models require real heavy metal, big iron, and one of the reasons OpenAI decided to work closely with Microsoft was access to Microsoft's extended server farm network and capacity to generate the spectacular computing power that they've been putting to work. The second thing was we didn't have access to accessible large language databases in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. We didn't have what is available now, largely based on the internet, but from other sources as well. And the third was we didn't have a set of mathematical tools that could make sense of parameterized prediction models that have 175 billion parameters. I mean, we just didn't have, and the notion of layered neural nets and the last 20 years of research has developed probably about a dozen mathematical models that help us make sense. So the math, the data, and the computer power together generated what we're at the current level. And somehow what that's missing is the next step is that the JEPA model will permit that. So I think that the next challenge is going to be what is going to be the interface between real working humans and the capacity of these technologies to better understand the environment and provide advice on our environment to us as we systematically misperceive the environment. So if you say evolutionary intelligence, what's the key idea? The key idea is that these technologies can be compensatory, can compensate for the relatively well understood limitations of the human cognitive system and the built-in biases of the human cognitive system. What was beneficial for survival when we had clubs and maybe stones as resources for us in the grasslands and the jungles may not be the same that will serve us well in the modern environment.